a ship.
Well,
What'd you do?
unless you wanted to be a famous ship, and Titanic would never know if it didn't list.
Hey, the speaking of ships people don't remember, the SS United States was on its way to become an artificial reef last I knew. Have they sunk it yet?
No, it hasn't. It hasn't
don't know if it,
gotten to its destination. Last I checked.
Oh.
I don't understand why it's an artificial reef. Once they sink it, doesn't it become a real reef?
I think the artifice is that people sponsored it rather than nature forming it on its own.
Yeah, then it should be a man-made reef, not an artificial, because it's there.
That's what artifice means, is man-made. Like the work of an artist. I know like artificial sounds bad in this day and age, but
what he said.
It's like artisanal. This is our artisanal reef.
This
made
is
for you by Brooklyn
reef.
hipsters.
Derek, I saw you had a happy birthday post today.
I did?
Yeah.
I distinctly remember you just had a birthday recently. Was it today? Can't be today.
No, it's been like a month ago.
That's what I thought.
I think John is referring to a post I made 2 days ago about someone else's birthday.
No.
Talking about the celebration of ownership.
Oh, you have an anniversary?
Well, yeah, that'd be an anniversary post, John, not a birthday.
No, that'd be a birthday post.
Yeah. No, it's anniversary.
It birthed into your life.
No. Well, and I mean, I tried to clarify it in the post, but this is, of course, Amelia Island Concours d'Elegance weekend. This is the weekend last year that I went to Florida to attend the Amelia Island Concours, and then post Concours drove down to the Miami area to look at the long sought after Duryea buggy yacht. So this marks the 1 year anniversary of at least laying eyes upon the buggy yacht. I did not purchase it for a few months after, and actually picked it up and brought it home Memorial Day weekend last year. So, but it is a Amelia Island Concours weekend will always kind of mark a moment in time for that part of my collection, I suppose you could say.
Well, it's always nice when the collection expands.
Indeed.
The closest I've gotten to expanding the collection recently is there's a General Motors built Frigidaire from about 1951 on our local Craigslist for $75, and I was like, oh, I really want a vintage garage fridge.
Do it.
I'm trying to hold out for just the right one, though. If it was the earlier generation, if they restyled them after 1949. I want that one if I'm going to get a Frigidaire, or I want a GE monitor top, or just any of the GE fridges from the 30s. It'd be good. Or I want a Norge, because they built Norges in Muskegon Heights, and of course, I grew up near Muskegon. So,
well, there you go. Yeah, you got to get
hometown pride. Yeah. Or if a Stuart Warner came along, it'd be hard to say no to that. I once had to junk a 50s Admiral. I had lingering guilt from that. I probably give one of those at home. And of course, free is always the best price. So if one comes along for free,
well, of course,
free.
Now we used to have when I was in grade school, junior high, so decades and decades ago, way before you guys' time. But we had an International Harvester refrigerator down in the basement that we used to keep our Pepsi and Diet Pepsis in and everything. And I think it eventually got sacrificed and became a kegerator because they drilled hole. I remember them drilling holes through it, and then tubes came out and mounted the tap to the outside. And where it went from there, I don't know. But
but I think I'm going to jump in here because I think that's one of the long forgotten parts of automotive history is really the overall industrial history that goes behind the automobile. And so many of the companies that built automobiles, they had industrial engineering sections in a number of those companies. General Motors most famously had a huge industrial design and engineering section within their company. But John just mentioned International Harvester, of course, mostly known for their tractors, but at one time they did build high wheel automobiles and trucks. And then you also had Crosley, which, famous for their radios that eventually would lead to him having money to build the cars and a number of other businesses he had had and been involved with. But, I think people tend to forget that these automotive companies, they weren't out there just building automobiles. They were doing a whole bunch of industrial work across the board, and a lot of it really freaking cool.
I got to take issue with just one thing, though, which is that Crossley wasn't an automobile company building refrigerators and radios. It was a refrigerator and radio company that built a car.
And that's why I said that led him to build the automobile.
I know.
Didn't say
but no, you raise a really good point. And when Billy Durant started that by buying Frigidaire way back in the 1920s, when it was just a concept, really, and everybody was like, "You're nuts! You can't buy this. We're in the car building business." And there's probably an argument that Billy Durant did buy too much stuff, but Frigidaire was one of the great successes, and GM didn't spin off Frigidaire until, I don't know, what, the 80s, maybe?
I think it was the early 80s.
But we've always had this streak in American business culture, though, where you just do one thing. Like in Japan, you're like, "Oh yeah, I'm Mitsubishi. I have shipyards and steel plants, and I build airplanes, and I'm in heavy construction, and I do generators and cars." And here we don't we don't do that anymore. Like GM did. They had electromotive division that did locomotives, and they had a couple different cracks at being an airplane producer, and it just hasn't stuck. Ford owned Philco for a long time. They owned and then spit out Autolite. I don't know. Did GM spin off Delco? GM went through a huge deacquisition phase in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
It's sort of like healthcare.
Delco's off on its own. Of course, they were also the ones that absorbed up Packard. The Packard Electrical Company that does Packard all the wiring. Which, if you look in GM vehicles, you look at the wiring. A lot of times you'll see it says Packard on it, and you're like, "Well, what's up with that?" Well, there you go, folks.
And Packard Cable came before the Packard Automobile Company, but it was the same guys, the same brothers. That's where they got the money to get into cars.
Right, Packard Electric Company, which made light bulbs and wiring and all those different things. And of course, a lot of the money came from their dad, who was a railroad magnate, but most people forget that. And and of course, it wasn't Packard Automobiles; it was Ohio Automobile Company building the Packard.
That's a terrible name for an automobile company, so they were right to change it.
I mean, Ohio, right?
Right. I mean, on the other hand, you do have a good opportunity for a wheel logo there. Ohio with the car body in the middle.
Yeah,
would have been a very different.
Thinking Bugs Bunny.
You're thinking about what?
Bugs Bunny, Ohio, high in the middle and round on both ends.
Oh.
Disapproving Cat mentions that Delco is still a GM subsidiary, so maybe it's Delphi that I'm thinking of that got spun off.
Oh, that was Saginaw Steering Gear. Yeah, they did. They're owned by the Chinese now. They're Next Year.
Yes, Next Year. That's what it is. Yep.
Yeah. No, that happened quite a while ago now, because I was still living in the Saginaw area when that was already a done deal. And Saginaw Steering Gear is a fascinating story, because if you walk around Saginaw, you will still see manhole covers there that say Jackson, Church, and Wilcox, which is an iron foundry that existed in the 19th century in Saginaw, and they got into producing steering gears for General Motors and others under the Jaycox brand, which is a contraction of Jackson, Church, and Wilcox.
Oh yeah,
and then GM bought Jaycox and renamed them Saginaw Steering Gear. And then that became also, because Steering Gear did a bunch of control mechanisms for aircraft during World War II, became something called Thompson Aerospace from a firm called Thompson Ball and Screw, which is still or was still active in Saginaw a decade ago when I was living there, very quietly in the original Jaycox plants in the old part of Saginaw. When you say steering gear today, people think of the big next year plant on the east side of I-75, but originally it was right downtown.
Yeah, and actually my great uncle worked there for steering gear for many, many years, and I have some items left, some some of the old news articles and things from their newsletter they'd put out, and but something I need to do research on is my lathe that I have is believed to have possibly come out of steering gear machine shop at some point. I need to do a little research on that and see if I can actually find any. There's a tag that has been painted over on one of the legs that I need to clean off and see what that is. But that'd be kind of fun if it was something from that part of GM history.
That's neat. I've got a 1945 drill press that a coworker gave to me. It's in really good shape, except like a lot of drill presses, it's missing the actual part that you put your workpiece on because somebody drilled it apart at some point. But it's dated 1945, and I look at it and I go, yeah, this is Arsenal of Democracy stuff. And I love the Saginaw auto plants for that, the machine gun plant and stuff. And I mentioned that because my maternal grandfather, worked for steering gear during the war as an inspector of M1 carbines that were made at the steering gear plant there, which is probably their most famous to non-car folk product at the steering gear plant. Unfortunately, I don't have any cool legacies from his time at the steering gear plant. My uncle would have had the first crack at those since he was the son. But yeah, no, I love the GM presence in Saginaw. I probably know more about it than I do any other city in Michigan. The old transmission plant is still there. They're an aftermarket brake provider now. Or actually, I think that plant did just close a couple of years ago. But the old, you've heard of a Saginaw 4-speed or a Saginaw 3-speed. That was that transmission plant. Everybody always writes those off as being not up to the level of the Muncie. But, they still put them behind mild V8s and things. They're nothing terrible to scoff at.
They were still a good transmission. Yeah. I mean, Muncie was built a little stronger, a little, tighter, things like that. But, and the funny thing is you keep talking about all this. And of course, Dave, you moved away from that mid-Michigan area.
Did you lose Derek too, Derek and Dave?
I did. I was afraid my headphones had gone out again. Derek, we can't hear you.
I think Derek just figured out we can't hear him.
Maybe he can hear us.
Are you guys there? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
No, we can hear you. We can hear you now. You must have that new Starlink internet.
No, my microphone decided to turn itself off.
It said, "This is enough about mid-Michigan. You're boring the listeners."
Yeah, it was like,
you're done.
Shut up.
You're talking about American technology. I'm a Chinese microphone. We need to talk about China.
China, they like Buicks there, or they did. They probably don't like anything now.
We keep talking about all this stuff here that the auto manufacturers and stuff, their peripheral companies made all of, the refrigerators, and I guess that's where we started on it. But what about, what do I want to say? Important developments from the automotive industry. What do we think are some of the most important developments, whether they be from some of those spin-off companies or just the auto manufacturers? What are some things? Do we have anything that might really be impacting or have impacted us over the years?
I mean, I don't know this conclusively, but I would be willing to bet money that the window AC unit was developed by one of those subsidiaries, possibly Chrysler, because Chrysler had window AC units real early in the 1960s. Well, and Nash owned Kelvinator. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to add to that, Dave, that Chrysler, one of their other industrial arms of the company was building major industrial air conditioning units.
Right.
So they
AirTech,
were
right?
already in they were already in that
Yeah.
field.
Wasn't
Yeah,
Chrysler
although
playing with that in the 30s or 40s with things that hung off the side of your car on the windows and that, though?
I don't know that Chrysler had a hand in the swamp coolers, but I mean, they were definitely a popular period accessory. But that works the same way that when we were in college, we'd put a box fan in front of our shower and turn it on full blast cold, and it would blow the cold air off the evaporating water onto you. And that's how those swamp coolers work, is that you're just
It's
using evaporative cooling to create a stream of
Mhm.
cool air into the
It's
car.
kind of like the Facebook Home Depot cooler where you fill the Home Depot 5-gallon bucket up with ice. Then
Yes,
put the
and
lid
blow a
on.
fan
Yeah.
through. Same thing. Yeah, except it uses the
that's a
motion
swamp
of the
cooler.
car. Yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, I have an old Route 66 guidebook from the 90s that says up to that point, it said, watch out because you want a hotel that says refrigerated air, because if it just says air conditioned, it probably has a swamp cooler built into the window of the motel room.
Nice.
Yeah. But the Derek knows this too, I'm sure, that the first automotive AC unit was from Packard in 39 or 40. Big clunky thing. But my thinking is that technology is probably what led to window mounts versus the big industrial refrigeration style of building AC. Because, building AC was around, I don't know, as early as the 30s at least, because you see the theaters in the summers back then advertising refrigerated air as a way to get people to go see a movie on a hot afternoon. But, having to scale that stuff down to work in a car, it's the same thing like a car radio, like Motorola, which was never affiliated with a car maker, but supplied a bunch of them, started out as a car radio maker. That's why it's called Motorola. But now we know it for mobile phone technology. So, and without those silly looking 50s style car phones that Max Smart and his ilk used, we wouldn't have our smartphones today, because that whole network developed out of that technology. So I think you could argue that that's, and who was a big mover and shaker in car stereos and phones and aircraft was Bill Lear, who did the Learjet and Lear audio equipment and all that stuff. So yeah, I mean the car stuff is still high tech. Just because it's everywhere doesn't mean it's not. It was the leader undeniably throughout the 20th century, up until aerospace really started to edge it out after World War II.
Well, it's a conversation another podcaster and I were having year and a half ago, talking about, maybe it's before you joined the show, Dave, but having Derek and I come on his show, and his is all about tech, and then discussing exactly this topic of what things from would we not have in our everyday life if it wasn't for cars, because the car manufacturers, etc. And I think you guys started on probably one of the most important inventions, being air conditioning, and being derived a little bit from the automobile, because we talk about how cell phones have changed the world and how the automobile has changed the world, but think of the way air conditioning's just changed the world. I mean, the world in which we live, would it function? Yes, it would, but it functioned much differently with air conditioning. Now we don't have to design these homes with a central kind of chimney that you open the windows and stuff, and the heat escapes. And
although, gosh, wouldn't it be nice? I mean, why do the heck do I have to pay money to run electric fans when I could have passive cooling like that in my house?
You just got to buy an old enough house, and you live in that area that there's got to be something. And I mean, I live here in Alabama. Well, I could pick up an antebellum mansion and restore it for $1.5 million and have the same thing.
And then you'll understand why you want to pay for your electrical to run those fans and air conditioning units if you live in the deep south.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, you guys are a decade younger than me. I went all the way through grade school, junior high, and high school, and none of the schools were air conditioned except in high school, the computer lab was air conditioned. Did you guys have air conditioning in your schools or?
Nope. I grew up in a house that didn't have air conditioning and went to school in a non-air conditioned school. I don't even think our computer labs at the time had any kind of air conditioning. I think they just ran fans in there, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, although two things. One, I think the summers were not as hot back then, and two, the school year just wasn't as long. So, like, in Michigan in particular, you weren't going to school until after Labor Day, and you were done before Memorial Day, and that's just not true anymore. But also, I know up here, like, AC is rapidly becoming a standard when it wasn't 10, 20 years ago, just because it's so much hotter and more humid here now than it used to be. It's like a swamp.
And it's because we've gotten used to air conditioning and we can't put up with the heat and humidity and things like we used to. I think, it's spoiled us.
Right. And it's allowed us to build and live in places where we probably arguably ought not to. Disapproving Cat says he went to school till at least the first week of June every year. But I mean, let's be honest, that's because they kept him after.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Summer school.
That's called you beat me to it. Yeah, that's called summer school, guys.
Yeah. Everybody else is like, hey, see you later. I'm going to Mackinac Island. Disapproving Cat's like,
I believe kids still go to school 180 days a year. We just give them 40 more days off during the year and all the additional vacations. I mean, Thanksgiving vacation.
They're just trying to move it to. Yeah, they're moving it to be more like what California has been doing for a long time, which is year-round school, where you just have longer breaks throughout the year, but you go all year.
Yeah,
which is weaning into going all year and not getting any breaks like you would do as an adult.
Well, that justifies paying the teachers. No, they're still underpaid.
But you do realize that all school is a training ground to
the factories
you into factory and business, like office work and things like that. They're training you to sit at a desk for 8 hours a day and do work.
Well, that's the way the United States works. You do that at school, and then you go get a $200,000 worth of student loans, and then you enter the world, and you're in debt for the rest of your life. So you can't. At least that's the theory I keep hearing from some of these people. But going back to what you said, Derek, and putting it back to the automotive realm, we all know California is such a stellar example for the automotive industry. Do we really want it affecting our schools too and our children's education? Because there's this comedian, you sent a link to Dave and I earlier this week that's sponsoring a bill that I really would love to read the bill, but trying to tone down some of the California stuff.
Well, tone it down only for collector vehicles, not for anything modern.
Well, and like every collector car specific thing, when you dig down into the language, it comes with some pretty serious limitations on what you're supposed to use that car for, to justify the limited impact that they're citing as a justification for the
I thought it just had to be older than 2000 at this point and be insured as a collectible automobile.
Second part's the kicker, though, because all of those policies have usage limitations in them, and they're getting more onerous.
Some of them really don't. I think, our wonderful people at Hagerty, I think they say there's no mileage limitations. You just have to own another car.
There may not be mileage, but I think there's still usage limitations, i.e. you can use it for as many miles you want as long as it's a legitimate collector car activity. But if you are driving it to the office on a nice Friday, even if you're within your unlimited mileage, you were outside of your acceptable use of the car, and they can, within their rights, deny their claim. They might not because it's bad PR, but you're probably in violation.
And I haven't read a Hagerty policy in a long time, but remember Hagerty even has that ability where you can rent collector cars.
Mm-hmm.
You want to have a 65 Mustang to run around in, on vacation. You can rent one through whatever, I would say the Turo division of Hagerty, but I can't remember what Hagerty calls their rental classic car company.
Well, so I will admit that this is essentially dated information at this point, but I have no reason to believe it's changed. But that citation that if you drive it to work and you get in a wreck and the language says you weren't supposed to be driving it from that came from an interview with a Hagerty exec. So that it wasn't, I'm not just pulling that information out whole cloth. And they said some states won't let us enforce that policy language, but it's in there, so at the end of the day, there's no get out of jail free here. If you want to drive your 75 Valiant with the collector plates and the smog exemption every day, you're violating the law. Are you going to get away with it? Probably. Are you individually having a very big impact on the social ills that's supposed to be cured there? Probably not. But although you may have found a loophole that gets you not hassled, you're not actually in compliance with the law. Full stop.
It's only breaking the law if you get caught.
That's how I've always lived. Cop didn't see it. I didn't do it.
And there's the disapproving look from the lawyers.
Yeah.
Yeah, see, he's obviously not a defense attorney. Nah.
Notice he says nothing. Are you pleading the fifth? Is that what it's called?
No, I'm not getting paid.
Oh.
Yeah, it swings me back to a gentleman who used to rent a parking spot from my dad's company he was an attorney, and we can make it car related because he drove a C4 Corvette convertible, and the license plates were SODDIT, and he was a defense attorney, and people would ask him, what the heck did SODDIT mean? And he said, every time I ask somebody, I ask them all the same question: did you do it? And the answer is always, some other dude did it, and that's his license plate.
A lot of really funny, exceedingly cynical lawyers out there.
So, but what other inventions do we think the automotive industry might have thrust upon us that go beyond the bounds of the automotive industry? I mean, we've come up with some great things from.
I mean, how about same day delivery or whatever for everything? I mean, you didn't get that with the railroads and the Wells Fargo wagon. Big trucks are automobiles, and if we didn't have them absolutely freaking everywhere, we'd be dependent on much larger loads hitting distribution centers on a much less frequent basis and then getting distributed amongst our communities the way it was 125 years ago.
Well, we used to with the Pony Express. We had 28-day delivery.
I mean, listen, there's no doubt that the Victorian world was exceedingly good at what it was doing and interconnected, and its railroads blew the heck out of anything we've got today, but it was slower. And,
but also remember, you could ship your kid back then. Now you can't do that or you get in trouble.
You can, but you've got to do it the right way through the airline with the other traveler. You can't just paste a bunch of stamps on their forehead and hand them to a letter carrier. And wasn't that only for 15 minutes in 1913?
I don't know. But I mean, now it's even easier because you just call them an Uber and ship them off somewhere in an Uber.
Now, I don't drive Uber, but if I did and somebody tried to shove an unaccompanied kid in the car, I'd be like, no, sorry.
No, I heard an interesting trick this weekend. I never thought of it. We had the Birmingham chili cook-off this year, and it's grown and grown over the years. And this year it was just absolutely huge. And I don't know how many tens of thousands of people attended. But a gentleman walked into, I was at a cigar shop hanging out for a little bit, and two guys came in and, we came from the chili cook-off, and they were talking about the crowds, and we just parked down the street here, which was, the shop's maybe a mile from the cook-off, but they parked there and they Ubered to the chili cook-off because of the parking situation there. And they said, what it costs? It was only a mile, like $5. And he goes, oh, no. They knew what was going on. It cost them like $25 to Uber 1 mile, but they were dropped right off the gate. No, they were dropped right off at the gate. And would you really want to walk home in Alabama weather? Yeah. But I said, I would have paid $25 to have a parking spot near the gate. And that's literally what they did. And it's all of a sudden got my brain turning. Like, I've got these tickets to go to all these events at our civic center, and I really don't like walking around downtown Birmingham, I'll be honest, especially at night. I know a lot of cops that say, I don't like walking around downtown Birmingham, especially at night. And I'm going, well, I can park where I have parking in a secure lot, and then I could Uber from that lot to the front door of the civic center, and I should be reasonably safe. And is it worth the 10 or $15 to do that each way? But that's kind of a car thing, I guess, is being able to utilize the Uber technology to get a good parking spot, because somebody like me, I like a really good parking spot. And some of these malls are huge. I could park it way out at Christmas and then Uber up to the building.
It's funny because you mentioned the cops on the beat and things the automobile has changed. And it occurs to me that one thing that has gone away is the cop on foot. Like there's no guy in blue twirling a nightstick downtown anymore, by and large. They're in a SUV parked on a corner lot observing from behind the glass.
We still have cops on horseback.
I still see in big cities, I still see foot patrol and horseback. Now, in your smaller towns, places like that, definitely the cops are just sitting in their cars watching and waiting for the speeder to go by or the guy to run the red light, so they have something to do. But I don't think it's completely taken it away, but it's definitely diminished the idea of the cop on foot or horseback for sure. Unless you go to Canada, because I'm pretty sure the Royal Canadian Mounted Police still all ride horseback, right? Don't they?
Well,
yeah,
I'm
and
going
they carry
back
Webley revolvers.
Going back to our earlier technology, air conditioning. The cop walking around twirling the nightstick isn't sitting in an air-conditioned Tahoe, all relieved, ready to rush into action. So here we are back at air conditioning.
So they're just reserving their energy and keeping themselves fresh, so that when something happens, they can jump on it.
It's the action fridge. I'm going to start thinking of it that way.
Yeah.
Gasoline-powered action fridge.
I like it.
How about car camping and frankly, like that level of backwoods accessibility without having to keep a horse alive? That's something we only have because of the car.
But horses could get us much deeper into the backwoods than any car can.
Well, I mean, and then you got dirt bikes, I guess, but you can't feed a dirt bike what it can scoff or on the trail, I suppose. So I don't know. I feel like if the horse was truly a superior solution, more of them would still be in use for that purpose.
Yeah, Neil, I believe RV tech would count. What's your idea?
Well, I think he's playing off
that.
Camping and traveling. Yeah.
A Conestoga wagon versus a modern Overlander. If only Studebaker was around still, they could have bridged that gap.
Well, didn't the Crawford, Derek, I think when I visited you there, didn't they have one of the earliest RVs?
Yeah, I mean, yes. Yeah. What were referred to as house cars back in the day. Yeah. And really automotive camping starts out with canvas tents that you would kind of stake out and tie to the side of your automobile and be able to open the doors within that canvas tent area. And then eventually a few companies came along and decided, well, maybe we can just build a miniature house on top of this chassis. And all of a sudden you had this thing called a house car, which was the beginnings of the modern RV. I mean, even some of them, I mean, the one at the Crawford is a 1920, it's built on a 1926 Jordan chassis. And even the sides of that, they don't actually like slide out, but they actually fold down and become the bed. So you have a canvas that stretches out over just like a pop-up tent would. And
I'm gonna
the
say like a
sides
pop-up
fold
camper.
down and make more room. Or a pop-up camper. Yeah, yeah. And
and to
I mean, all these ideas, I always like to say that all the ideas we see today in the transportation industry, let's call it automotive, you know, and none of it's really that new. It's all old ideas that are just continuously being improved upon and built on.
Oh, I've totally said that repeatedly on this show that, certain tech we're using today, and it's, oh, wow, well, geez, we were using that tech in 1935. Just we now have the ability with computers to make it work, or metallurgy or whatever, advancements in technology.
So if I can drag us back to mid-Michigan, Saginaw and Bay City both had pop-up camper building industries in the 1920s. Saginaw was Auto Camp with a K,
Mm-hmm.
and Bay City was Zegelmeyer. And I think the Henry Ford has an Auto Camp all set
Yes,
up
they
in
do.
it someplace. And I mean, I would love to get my hands on one of those. I had greater plans to try to replicate one back when I had my Model T project going. But yeah, I mean, people went camping quite early on with the automobile, first out of necessity, and then just because they discovered they loved it.
Well, the
Well, and
automobile.
the other thing.
The automobile
Let you talk
expanded
over it.
what you could do is you would be able to travel. And in I would assume in the earlier days where the automobile could go, there weren't all these hotels to pull over to. So camping was part of that, just like it was horseback riding across country or stagecoaching across country.
Right. The hotels were by the railroads, which weren't necessarily where the roads were.
Yeah, and I was going to add into that was that, we also have to remember that in the early 1900s, Teddy Roosevelt, as our president, began the national park system and setting aside, these lands for public consumption. And that, not only the automobile getting people to places, and actually one of my great uncles on my dad's side of the family used to actually drive people from Owasso, Michigan, out to West Yellowstone in the 1920s and 30s, I think it was, so they could go out and see Yellowstone National Park. And the automobile took people places that, number one, they'd never been before, but number two, that our own country was saying, these are places you need to experience and see because they're significant and we want to preserve them. And then, of course, we get to the post-war era and the interstate highway system, and that just booms everything because now people can get directly to places on very good pavement.
No, I remember back when I was at White Post, I was restored a 1917 Packard Cloverleaf Roadster. And that car, the original owner, the family owned one of the major railroads in the north, Minnesota and that. And they would load that car onto one of the rail cars, go around. And when they would get to a place, they would unload it and they would go four-wheeling, camping, they used it like you would a Jeep. And we joked, because the guy I was restoring it for bought it when he was in high school in the 50s. He was a second owner and he never washed it. He was so proud. In the whole 50, 60 years he owned it, it had never been washed. So we joke that it could have original Yellowstone mud stuck in it somewhere from the 20s. But
well, the cars of that era, I mean, one of their appeals, I think, is that they are much more tied to the natural world because the roads were so much cruder. And it's funny because even today you can rent a Model T and drive it through, I think, Yosemite, and either Yellowstone or Glacier still has its old gear jammer buses, which are big, open topped, slow moving white tour buses.
Back up because yes, Glacier.
Some
still
of them
has
have been
the
gutted,
buses,
but
not
some of them are original, right? All of them?
All the fleet that runs and actually takes tourists around the park are all modernized underneath for safety.
But underneath.
Because believe me, I've driven one of the white Yellowstone buses, the one that's in the Crawford, and I've been to Yellowstone.
Mm-hmm.
I cannot even imagine the size of the cojones on the guy that drove those white buses through Yellowstone back in the day, because those are extremely steep grades. And let me tell you, even though that's got a granny gear, an extremely low first gear that you can put it in and basically crawl, I don't know how they didn't fall off the cliffs, because it's just, I would not want to drive one of those buses in its original form on any of those roads. Which
were probably not as good in the 20s.
Exactly. Yeah. It's just, to me, they were very, very brave men that were driving those vehicles on those roads near those cliffs.
And imagine these tourists just blithely getting on and going for that ride. Of course, honestly, though, it may have been better than a carriage ride. When you think about the primitive brakes and things on a carriage, I mean, you're like, we're looking at it in retrospect, like, oh, things are so much better now. But they probably were looking and go, oh, well, this is much better than trying to do this with horses. So, but my point, I think, as far as that, though, was simply the open-topped, more spacious nature of how those vehicles were built versus everything today, which is built like a tank that you can roll down a cliff and walk away from. Not that that's not better from a lot of perspectives, but as far as seeing the scenery, it is not.
Agreed. Now, I don't know if it's technology, but yeah, one of the interesting things I always find to talk about and people don't think about is, I just mentioned the interstate highway system. Of course, that was partially thinking about war movement as well. But one of the things that I think, a lot of people don't really take into consideration in the impact the automobile has had is the fact that for every one automobile we have, we technically need to have 2 parking spots in this world for that one automobile. Because
at least
it has to have a spot where it's parked and a spot waiting for it wherever it's going.
Well, in an ideal world,
we wind up with these massive parking lots.
Well, in an ideal world, it's parked in my driveway and I'm going to drive to Target and park, and the car that's at Target right now parked, I'm going to take its spot as it leaves to go home to its driveway. So 1.5 spots per car.
If that's the way you do math, okay.
Neil wants to know everything I know about Airstreams, which could be, I don't know, either dangerous or embarrassing for me.
They're shiny.
And we got 16 minutes.
The original ones were not shiny because the original ones were made out of masonite back in the 30s, but they've pretty much all dissolved at this point. Probably Wally Byam did not come up with the Airstream idea, the polished aluminum riveted streamlined bit, all on his own. It was probably stolen a little bit from, was it Walter Ballas, who was an aircraft designer who designed 3 or 4 trailers, not so much for the camping market as a way to house his crews while he studied aircraft designs he was working on out at test fields, which are often in like remote desert areas. I mean, there was a huge camper trailer industry that grew up in the 30s out of those pop-ups we were talking about earlier, where they became more like what we would think of as today's tow behind campers, up to and including the fifth wheel. I mean, the fifth wheel, Glenn Curtis helped popularize fairly early on. But back then, instead of having to have a pickup truck, you'd need a business coupe and you put it where like the rumble seat would be. Just take that lid off entirely and the fifth wheel would drop down in there. Because Curtis built a bunch of streamlined, I don't know, were the Curtis trailers aluminum or were they something
They were
else?
aluminum, but they were if I remember correctly, they were just like early automobiles, wood skeleton, but aluminum clad. But if I remember right, all the Curtis ones were painted. They were never polished.
Right, which I actually prefer in a lot of ways. I think they're really pretty. I mean, I wouldn't scoff at any 30s, 40s, 50s camper trailer if you gave it to me, obviously. But the painted ones look particularly cool. I would love to build a schoolie out of a period school bus and camp in that. But unfortunately, those have probably all returned to the earth at this point.
Well, most of them, yeah. But if you really look at some of the early school buses, it's not that hard to recreate one. I mean, even Bluebird #1, which in Henry Ford Museum is in its, let's call it, final configuration, because the bus was modified over time from when it was first built to the configuration it's now in. That is what is preserved in Henry Ford Museum. But all it is I call it a triple T, because it is a double T chassis with a Model T chassis added to it, stacked on top of each other to give it the extra strength
Wow.
to hold the body and do everything it needs to do. And it's all the running gear is just the TT truck running gear. They just added the extra Model T frame to give it a little more strength. So you can easily build one.
Did they do anything? I mean, does it have like a Warford or anything to give it some more gear? I mean, was it just a completely stock TT chassis?
Oh man, it's been like 15 years since I drove that thing, Dave.
It's hilarious to me though, because it's
I
not the
want to
first
say
time I've seen a.
it does maybe have a Warford I feel like, yes, it has additional gearing. I seem to remember that.
I mean, if it's that heavy that it needed the extra frame, I can only imagine. I mean, that's just so much for 20 horsepower to be hauling around.
Oh, it's a
Um,
wonderfully slow vehicle.
yeah, all TTs are, but the perfect. They'd be perfect for going around Yellowstone if you had the cojones to drive
Yeah.
the rear brake only TT around.
Well, that's when you need the Rocky Mountains, right? The Rocky Mountain brake
Yeah,
setup,
and then
right? That's
some.
Rocky Mountains.
Right. There I won't say famous, but there is a picture that I love quite dearly showing I'm blanking on what brand they are, but 1920s touring cars with no fenders driving the Rubicon, the famous Jeep trail out west.
Yeah.
I think they're Studebakers maybe. And because there was a hotel out there and that was how you got to the hotel. And now I'm told that the Rubicon was more of a road back in the 20s than it is today. Like it has really degraded, and that's part of the appeal of taking your Jeep out there. But still, like the capability of those tall cars with their rugged suspensions and their skinny tires is quite impressive.
Pretty sure there are Model T groups that go run the Rubicon, because of
Are
course
they? That would be great. I'd love to go see that.
Model Ts with their 3-point suspension and everything, they can often articulate further than a lot of Jeeps can.
Mhm.
I mean, look up some pictures of, just type in probably like Jeep versus Model T or something, and there's some pretty hilarious pictures of Jeeps attempting to do the one ramp climb and see how high they can get. And then the Model T comes up behind them and goes like even further up the ramp because the front axle can articulate so far.
Not having shock
But
absorbers helps too.
that too, yeah.
Have you ever seen,
And I
speaking of four
love
wheel?
that's what I love about the early cars is taking them on dirt 2-track back roads through the woods, and people
It's what they were designed
look
for.
at you.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're look at you. You take that kind of car out there. I'm like, what do you think they drove on when they were new?
Yeah. Yeah. The reason these things are dangerous on the freeway is because they're designed for little dirt 2-tracks that people can't even get down anymore. Are you familiar with the Living Good 4-wheel drive conversions for the Model T?
Yeah, I mean, familiar. I know of them. Yes, yeah, I've seen
You,
ads, and
you
I don't
couldn't
think I've ever
rebuild
seen
one
one in
for me yet.
person.
No, I've only seen them in
No.
photos, but I mean, it
I
would be
mean, I
really
could.
interesting to really
I
ring one
wouldn't.
of those out.
I would say that I could probably rebuild it, Dave. I could figure it out.
Well, okay, fine. You could, yeah, even without your knowledge, but yes, okay. Fair enough. But it's amazing how far back 4-wheel drive technology goes. I mean, there was the Jeffrey and Nash quad in
Mhm.
the First World War. That was a
Well, and
huge
the FWD
4-wheel drive company.
FWD
Yeah.
company. Yeah, FWD was 4-wheel drive. Yeah. Yeah, there were a number of there's a great early. Oh, I think it's an Nash. Or no, it's an FWD at the Henry Ford. A World War One FWD, heavy. Got it. I think it's a 3-ton or a 5-ton military truck in the collection there. Fantastic. Very interesting to look at and see the 4-wheel drive setup.
And you can probably get it going, put it in low gear, and run away from it if you want, and then come back a half hour later and get in.
Well,
and
yeah,
start it.
you put it in low gear and in 4-wheel drive, let the clutch out, just maybe tick the throttle stop up a touch on the carb. And then yeah, you just lock the steering somehow going straight through the desert. Just get off, have a cup of coffee, chit chat, go to the bathroom, come back, just hang out.
It's unfortunate that we lack places where we can go play with the really slow, really big old stuff anymore. Like that's one of the things I really love about Old Car Festival is it's an opportunity to see a lot of that older, slower stuff in a built up setting where they're not a hazard to navigation.
Yeah, and I don't know if I should say let's not get into it on the show or if it's, but I think we have talked about it maybe even before you were on the show, Dave. Uh, and hey, if anybody listening hears this and they want to, invest or talk to us about some partnership. Last week we talked about getting some racing series going with one of our old hosts that does Grip Autocross, but one of the ideas I've kind of been wanting to look into, and it would take an investment from someone who has some money, but picking somewhere somewhat centrally located within the United States and buying maybe a couple hundred acres and creating a antique vehicle driving park where we've got racetracks, we've got all these places. Why not create something where antique car guys can all go meet and have 2 tracks and cobblestone roads and various setups where you can run your old cars as they were meant to be run?
I love it. A theme park.
Basically, yeah. So any investors listening, I'd love to pitch the idea and talk to you. No driving gloves, and love to get involved.
I feel like on that note, we should say goodbye.
Yeah, doing some technical things in the background here. I apologize, guys.
John, I want to know about our illustration this week because it's fascinating. Did Koenigsegg build the pyramids? Is that the implication here? What's
But is that supposed to be a Koenigsegg? I thought it was a BMW i8.
I don't listen. Any modern slick looking car I can't identify immediately becomes a Koenigsegg because it's the most outlandish name I can think of. But
See,
yeah,
to me it looks like
go off.
i8. Yeah, the Egyptian i8. I don't know.
So
Give me just a second.
the Bavarians built the pyramids.
Of course, you didn't know that.
I like how the wagon wheels match the.
That is why they're so perfect. It's German.
It's true.
The request to ChatGPT was, can you create a piece of automotive artwork as if it were done in Egyptian times?
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So we
So
have the
really, you
Egyptian.
should have just
This is
pulled up 1920s automotive advertising after they opened King Tut's tomb.
no. This is hidden in one of the tombs, probably inside the Sphinx. This car. This is Egyptian automotive technology.
This is what Napoleon's troops were trying to get at when they blew the nose off with a cannon.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I prefer
Das
to
ist
call it.
the Königsegg. That was the I-8. Das ist the I-8.
See,
It's a nondescript car. The way AI does it, it takes bits of all the other cars that it sees pictures of. But no, it's a little bit of an Egyptian theme in that, and unfortunately did it in a 3000 by 3000 aspect. So that's why we get the no driving gloves over here in the funkies.
You know.
It's
See, I
near-
always give
reflected in the
my
Nile.
yeah. See, I always give my animals nicknames. You know, so like my cat right now is named Otto, like Nicholas Otto, OTTO. He
opposite.
becomes Otto von Kitten. But so I always like to refer to the Sphinx as the Sphinxter.
Well,
Oh. Womp
since you
womp.
did bring up the artwork, I'm working on a way that every week I've got different artwork behind me and different cover art for the podcast. Those will be, and it's happening. It's what I've spent a majority of the week doing. Will be available on either t-shirts or metal signs for your garage or office or your body. So
It's going down. It's happening.
it's going. It's part of the Patreon deal that's coming out. Be watching for all the details. Hopefully, sometime in April.
Cool.
I'm still waiting for some background legal things. Even the guys don't know everything about it, but
I
I
don't know
know
anything
we're
about
still
anything,
we're
and
just
that's
still
how I
waiting
like
for the
it.
free samples.
Ooh, like donuts.
and there is a tier of the Patreon that you will be able to get a free T-shirt every month for less than what a T-shirt costs. I.e., the Patreon will cost you less than what the T-shirt would cost, but it'll entitle you to a free T-shirt every month. So
Intriguing. Stop doing laundry
So-
entirely. Join the Patreon.
yeah, exactly.
Wear
So-
one shirt per month.
Or have 30 Patreons.
There you
There we go.
But with that, like Derek, you give it your speech about telling a friend.
Oh, do I get to go back to that? Yay, look at me moving up in the world again. All right, guys. Well, hey, it's been another great episode of No Driving Gloves. And remember, if you like being part of the No Driving Gloves community, if you want to learn more about the upcoming Patreon that's coming out and the great clothing and other options we're going to have, keep listening. Go over to YouTube, click that little, I think it's a bell button there, and subscribe so you can follow us. We're on all the other social medias as well most of the time, so give us a like over there as well. And if you go ahead and click on the QR code, you can always still buy us coffee if you would like. We do enjoy coffee over here at No Driving Gloves. And of course, as I always like to say, if you like being part of the community, if you like No Driving Gloves, yeah, we like when you help us, grow and do things and make this a better place. So help us grow. Share the show.
Goodbye.
As everybody just said, you now know. Get off your ass, go burn some gas, because we are